Hey everyone, and welcome to Spoiled. This is the official Spoilercast of Sifted Games at Sifted.net. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing Season 1 of The Last of Us on HBO. If you have not watched the show, this is your cue to stop listening now. I'm going to give you a few seconds of silence to get out of here, and after that, all bets are off. So if you have not watched the first season of The Last of Us on HBO, stop listening right now.
Although if you clicked on a show called Spoiled, The Last of Us, and you haven't watched The Last of Us, you kind of deserve it, huh?
I'm just
Unless you just got really screwed by autoplay. I don't know.
I'm just covering all the bases here, Matt. You know how people are about spoilers.
Oh, yeah.
And by the way, if you're wondering who's talking to you about the first season of The Last of Us, I'm Shane Satterfield. You can find me on Twitter at Dinfire. And Matt Keil is alongside to discuss the show, and you can find him on Twitter at MKyle. Before we start going on kind of an episode-by-episode synopsis and analysis of the show, I just want to share some general feelings about it. First thing I would say is that it's amazing, and that it's way better than I thought it was going to be, and that Neil Druckmann is way better at this movie and TV stuff than I ever could have dreamed.
Yeah, I mean, it helps that the games he makes are very cinematic, narrative, kind of linear games to begin with.
It does, yeah.
He's got a mind for it, and I mean, I think this is what he wants to do.
I agree, and I don't like it.
We will definitely get Last of Us Part 3. He'll finish his baby.
Yeah. I don't know if after that, if he'll make another video game, though.
I think he might step away and become more of a film, more in film and television stuff, because, like, I mean, look, I think that's what he'd like to do. It's clearly he wants to tell stories. You do not need to work in games to tell stories, even though you can tell specific kinds of stories in games you necessarily can't in others. But I think I think he will split his time, because you are dealing with someone, clearly he saw the opportunity to tell the story slightly differently in this adaptation. It's one of the best adaptations of a game, or really any medium to another medium I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But he also understands the strengths of interactive storytelling as well. So I can definitely see Neil Druckmann being someone who's like, I want to tell this particular story. This is the correct story for a TV show. Or like then he's got another idea. He's like, the idea needs to be a video game. I could see him just sort of choosing his medium based on what he wants to do currently in terms of what story he wants to tell. And he's going to have the clout to be like, hey, Sony, I want to make another video game, and they'll be like, yes, sir, please come on in.
He's kind of the Gaijin Kojima. Like, he's Kojima from America. I feel like both of them really want to be movie directors and movie writers. They don't really want to make video games.
Yeah, I don't want to make video games from Druckmann, but the difference is that Neil Druckmann is a very talented man. And
Kojima he's very good at making
in terms of storytelling. Yeah, Kojima is not.
Yeah,
no. I mean, Neil Druckmann is basically aiming to make prestige television and film, and Kojima is making knockoff John Carpenter flicks. Like they're very different.
That both
levels.
of them tried to use game development as a vehicle to get to do what they really wanted to do. I guess is where I would draw the parallels.
One of them did it.
Right, it did it very well.
Kojima did not.
Yeah.
I always found it interesting that Kojima never moved more into anime, because I know he wants to do Hollywood live action stuff.
Yeah.
But like that industry is very small in Japan. It certainly was small at the time he was in his heyday in the 90s and early 2000s. Now it's a little different.
Yeah.
But like I was always surprised that he didn't. Also, he could have. I mean, he would have been making schlock, but like he seems to like that.
I mean, that's kind of his wheelhouse, isn't it?
Yeah, but we're dealing in meanwhile, Neil Druckmann has co-executive produced one of the best shows HBO's ever put out. So
it's literally, I mean, it doesn't matter, regardless of whether it's based on a video game or not.
Not at all.
It's literally one of HBO's best shows ever.
Yeah, and it's got by the midpoint of the season, it was at a viewer average of, I think, 24 million.
Yeah, it's like a Game of Thrones numbers.
It took Game of Thrones 4 years to get to that point.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And obviously it's different because Game of Thrones was on cable and this is on streaming, so it's a little different. But like, and every single episode of Last of Us had more viewers than the last one, except for the one that aired
the Friday
before the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
that one had like 11 million because they had to count the whole weekend.
Right.
All the other counts are just Sunday.
Gotcha.
But other than that, which you don't have the data for Sunday because it's a different situation, every single episode had more viewers than the last. That is extremely rare.
Oh yeah. So this is already confirmed.
Usually you peak around episode 3 and then drop and then come back up for the finale. This just built.
Yeah. And this is confirmed already. 2 more seasons.
Yeah.
At least 2 more seasons.
Yeah, they say at least 2 more seasons for the second game.
And now this first season, 9 episodes, and it takes you through the whole course of the first game.
Yeah, which also gives them time to get the third game finished.
Right. So what they've said is that part 2 is going to get them through more than one season of the show.
Oh, yeah.
They announced that this week.
Yeah. At least 2 seasons.
So
it's a bigger game. It's a bigger story.
If there is a 4th season, that will be based on The Last of Us Part 3 video game.
Mm-hmm.
So
probably they might actually have to go to season 4 for 2, depending on how they run it. But
he said
season,
the show would never outstrip the games.
Yeah.
So
season 1. Well, you will never see season 3. You will never see Part 3 material in the show first.
Right. You'll never have important plot points broken or released in the show before the video game. They will always happen first in the games. So. Next 2 seasons, they're going to spread out. The Last of Us Part 2, they're going to split it. And I think both you and I know where they're probably going to cliffhang.
I do not, though.
Really? You don't think at that most pivotal moment they're going to...
I think you structure that differently for a non-interactive game.
There's an obvious part in The Last of Us Part 2.
There is, but I think you do that differently for a non-game.
Okay.
I think there's a I'm very, very interested to see how they adapt the second story, because I think the way they have it structured in the game works very well for a game in a situation, and that you see this in this one too. Like, they are very, very aware that building empathy and identification with these characters is different in a medium where you are not playing as them.
Yeah.
And considering who you play as in the second game and who you switch to in the second game, if you're not playing as her, that's a harder sell. You have to build the empathy sooner.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's going to. I'm very. And look, I have all the confidence in the world they'll do that well, because they already did it well.
Yeah.
In this one.
Yeah.
They know exactly where to expand, exactly where to pull away, exactly where to keep it the same. Like, it's a remarkable achievement. In that, I would teach a college course on adapting from one medium to another just using this show.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
So as we said, there's 9 episodes. We are going to go through the episodes chronologically and kind of discuss each one. One thing that's unique about doing a spoiler cast for this is that there's the dichotomy between the interactive version of The Last of Us, the game, and then the non-interactive version, which is the show on HBO, and the differences between the two. How they handled the characters, how they handled the plot. In a lot of cases, some parts of the plot from the game are completely gone, replaced by other things. It's very interesting how they've decided.
Sometimes there's just a lot more information in the show than what we got in the game, which is
fill in the blanks a lot in the show.
There's the last episode has a section that Druckmann's had it in mind for a bunch of different spin-off and supplemental material that he just never got made, and then they realized they could do it here, and so they did, which is pretty neat. It's a masterclass in how to expand but keep it you're still keeping the same story and keeping the same themes and keeping the same impact.
Yeah.
It's very. I don't know if I've ever seen anything like it. Like, you're talking about Godfather level adaptation from the Mario Puzo book.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's adaptations that have outstripped their source material. Like, Jaws is a much better movie than the book Jaws. Mm-hmm. But it's also very, very different. Yeah. Like, it's barely recognizable outside of some of the characters have the same name, and there's a shark.
Yeah. There's also the same setting, and
right.
There's some.
But you wouldn't those characters are completely different people.
Absolutely.
And this is just everything's. It's a fascinating way of the nuance to how to adapt this thing is rare.
It is
it's rare not in just terms of knowing what you need to do, but knowing when to hold back.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yep. Okay, let's start with episode 1. The first big difference between the show and the game is when it starts. Mm-hmm. So in the show, everything starts in 2003. In the game, everything starts in 2013.
Which is when the game came out.
Right, which is when the game came out. So the fungal infection is basically the same, except they explain it a lot more in the show. The fungal infection is mutated cordyceps.
Yeah, the show actually starts in the late 60s.
Right.
On a talk show.
There's a talk show where they're explaining how fungus could ultimately end society. Flash forward to 2003, and that's basically what's happening. Mm-hmm. There's this crazy fungus that has invaded America's food supply. It got into the wheat, and so therefore it's in the flour, and therefore people who are eating baked goods are being turned into basically zombies.
And our heroes accidentally or fail to eat flour for
it's
like a
very
whole
deft
day.
how they turn down the pancakes, and it just all works out that they do not eat the flour.
And there's a lot of stuff. I mean, a lot of it is from the game. Like there is a newspaper you find that speculates on it being in the food supply. There's a newspaper you find that mentions riots in Jakarta,
right?
Which is where in the show very explicitly it started there, and that makes a lot of sense because Jakarta is actually the home of the largest flour processing plant in the world.
Interesting. Did their homework.
Yeah. Well, also so it's never made explicit what happened. I mean, Joel speculates on it in the game, but the show outright lays it out. Like it came from the flour.
Yep.
Like that's what happened.
Yep.
Because of the raise in global temperatures.
Yeah.
Which is implied in the talk show segment.
The biggest change in the show, I believe, from the game, as far as the base rules of the universe, is that there's no spores in the show. So in the game, there are these spores that float in the air, and if you inhale them, you can become a zombie. In the show, the only way you can become a zombie is to be bitten,
or they stick their tendrils in you, kind of thing. Yeah.
But you can't just breathe in the air and become infected.
You need contact.
And that's a big change.
It is a big change, but I do think it's a better change.
It works for the show.
It works for the show because mainly because they didn't
people tiptoeing around all the time.
Well, they didn't want
spores in the air.
Well, they didn't want masks on the actors the whole time.
I can see that too.
The other thing about it is like it actually makes more sense. Because, like, I know that real life cordyceps in ants, like the point, it pops out and spits spores out.
Disgusting, yeah.
But the thing is, if it was spreading through spores, there would be no chance.
Everyone would be dead.
Like, because I know, in the game they put their masks on, they go through the spore infected area, and they come out. It would be in your clothes, it would be in your hair, it would be
it's not realistic at all.
Everyone, if you walk through a spore infested area, gas mask or no, you'd be infected.
Everyone's getting it
because it would be on you. Like there'd be no way to get rid of it. That's what spores do.
Yeah.
Like that's the whole point of spores.
Yep. Another change is that in the show, the cordyceps have these like vines, these tendrils that grow everything.
Cilia.
And if you step on them in the show, it alerts.
Yeah, they got a network.
The zombies. They can figure out where you are and they'll come.
Yeah.
In the game.
And I'll bet you that pops up in 3. Like they're going to add, that'll be a game mechanic in part 3. Yep. That'll be like the new evolution.
Where you can't step on certain stuff. Or they'll come and they have to survive a horde mode or whatever. So anyway, that's
that also, by the way, that's a real fungus thing.
Yeah.
Like that's a real thing. There are fungus networks that are the size of U.S. states.
Yep.
It's a mushroom is the largest living organism in the world. It takes up a giant. There's a
where a lot of life comes from.
Oh yeah. There's a quote from it's a bio professor. People get organic chemistry, and people keep asking about when he talks about life and organic. They ask about fungus or mushrooms, and he's like we don't know. They are not related to anything else in the world. We don't know where they came from. They are not part of the evolution. They are not plants. They are not animals. Some of them are immortal. Some of them can kill you. Some of them are beneficial. Some of them are just tasty. Like, we don't know. I cannot teach you about the mushrooms.
Yeah.
Like, the fungus are some of the weirdest things we live alongside on the planet, and we don't think about it because they're everywhere.
Yeah, it's true.
That's one of the things that makes this an effective apocalypse is, it's just that little turn of the lens, and you're like, this thing that's everywhere we don't think about suddenly can kill you, and that's the end of it. Like,
I mean, COVID.
I mean, that's there too.
But same thing.
but there's something a little more graspable about a respiratory infection, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm not saying people would run around, and the cordyceps is a great thing because if you go look at videos of this thing, and the ant thing is there's cordyceps, there's versions of this for almost every species. One of the best videos I've seen, it's a beetle. It's not a cockroach, but it's similar to a cockroach looking beetle, and the whole back third, maybe half of it, is hollowed out. It's just gone. It's just a shell of a creature. It's a dead creature, but it's walking. It's moving.
Praying mantis also, the cordyceps for those.
Yeah,
creepy AF. Man.
The one thing I will say. No cordyceps has ever jumped species.
Oh, really?
They've never even seen it jump from one ant subspecies to another.
Interesting.
So the idea that it would be able to jump from insects to us is basically impossible.
Okay.
Because I'll give you another little factoid. We eat cordyceps every day.
Yeah.
Because it is literally in the food supply. But it's harmless to us.
Yeah.
So the idea that you're not even talking about the flower supply being contaminated by some new thing. You're talking about something that's always been there suddenly being dangerous. And yes, we would have no idea until it happened.
Yep. As the show starts, it's Joel. They avoid eating the flour. They turn down the pancakes.
They don't get the pancakes.
All hell starts breaking loose.
She won't eat the gross cookies.
Yep.
He forgets to get a cake.
Yep.
Like it
all works out. And so he flees with his daughter Sarah. But as it turns out, he ends up in a confrontation with what are even the authorities at that point? It's just the government.
They're like the National Guard or something. Yeah.
And
the army.
And his daughter is killed essentially. And as you might imagine, that's quite a shocking moment for him. But then the show jumps 20 years. And Joel is living in a quarantine zone in Boston. It's managed by FEDRA, which is the Federal Disaster Response Agency. They're basically the bad guys.
Yeah, they're basically like militarized FEMA.
Yep. And he is with his partner Tess, who is this middle-aged woman who he's been like kind of working as a smuggler with.
Yeah, who actually looks middle-aged in the show as opposed to the game where she looks about 20 years younger than him.
Yeah, you're right. She does actually. I think she looks the appropriate age.
Yeah, also like and I think they were talking about having the woman who played her in the game play her in the show, but she had cancer at the time, and she actually passed away.
Oh, okay.
So instead you got Anna Torv, which is one hell of a substitute. She's great.
Yep.
If anybody remembers her from Fringe, she was very good.
So one thing we did leave out was when all hell broke loose, his brother Tommy was there with him.
Yeah, Tommy saves him from the guy shot at him.
Yep. And then Tommy ends up going out to Wyoming, but jump 20 years into the future, they haven't heard from Tommy in a long time. And
yeah, it's been a few months, and they don't.
And they're worried about
he usually communicates with him via radio, and he hasn't heard anything back in a while.
So they start to get worried about him, and basically, I guess Tess
was trying to get parts for the car they need to make the drive to Colorado, and got screwed over.
Yeah, they get scammed.
Yeah, they get scammed by what's his name, Robert.
Yep, Robert.
Yeah. And then she gets the shit beat out of her by Robert's guys.
Yep.
And gets away because the Fireflies, the terrorist organization that's fighting against FEDRA, blows up something next to the room she's being beaten up in.
Yeah.
And she gets away because the two guys who are beating her up die. And she gets back to Joel. And that's different from the game. But because in the game, and they decide to go get Robert and get their stuff back. And in the game, the quest to go find Robert and fight your way through all his goons is basically the tutorial. And in the show, they realize they don't need that.
Yeah.
So they combine.
There's lots of tweaks like that.
Yeah, they combine that with them meeting up with Marlene, the leader of the Fireflies, who introduces them to Ellie because she needs them to take Ellie west.
Yep. Well, the guy sells the battery to the Fireflies.
Yeah.
So then Tess and Joel.
So then they need to find Marlene.
They need to find the Fireflies. Marlene at the Fireflies, which they do.
And of course, it is established pretty much that through implication that all these people know each other.
Yeah.
Like the underground, the black market, the Firefly. They've
all been working because they're smugglers.
And Joel
and Joel were smugglers.
Joel's got a contact on FEDRA.
Yep.
A soldier who like looks the other way on things and stuff. It's much more established that there's a big elaborate thing happening here on all levels than it is in the game. Like Joel does not have a FEDRA contact in the game.
Yep. So
FEDRA is also depicted as a much more effective organization in the show. Like they don't have helicopters in the game.
Yeah.
In the game, it feels like FEDRA's sort of hanging on by a thread.
That's true.
In the show, FEDRA is winning the fight against the Fireflies. Yeah. The Fireflies are evacuating, basically.
Well, the other thing I would say, too, about the show versus the game is in the show, the world feels less dangerous. Mm-hmm. Like, the infected and the zombies are less of a danger than the other human beings in the show versus the game.
Yeah, but your choice is basically live out in the world at risk of the zombies or live under oppression.
Yeah.
And as we find out later, living under the Fireflies or even people who have overthrown FEDRA in general is not always better.
Right. Yeah, because they're also,
a theme to this series, it could just be people suck.
Yeah, which is generally pretty accurate, I hate to say it. So anyway, they go to Marlene, And they're looking basically for a way to travel. And she's like, well, look, I can hook you up if you'll help me deliver this girl, Ellie, to, at that point, she's trying to get him to go to Boston, I think.
No, they're in Boston, so she wants to get
the State House somewhere.
Deliver to the State House, and then they'll have other Fireflies pick her up and take her wherever they're going after.
Yeah, they'll get a working truck if they deliver her.
Yeah.
But then, while sneaking out of the QZ, the three run into a soldier on the outside. He tests him for infection and reveals that Ellie is positive.
That's Joel's contact.
Yep. And then Joel kills the soldier, and Ellie explains to them that they're immune. And there's this is also done way better in the show. The moments where people realize or can't accept that she's immune. The portrayal of this, the emotion of this in the show, so much sharper, so much more real than it was in the game. Like, I just feel like they didn't sell it well enough in the show. Like, the real doubt that, I mean, every time somebody encounters this where, Joel is she's like, I'm immune. He's like, oh, no, you're not. Like, and they're ready to kill her. It's just this instinct that as soon as someone's bitten, that they're dying and they're going to kill me. I need to kill them now. Yeah.
Although the show also does a better job of paralleling Joel attacking the Fedra guy, because you can tell that he has a flashback, basically a PTSD flashback to his daughter being killed by a man in body armor pointing a gun at him, and he jumps him and beats him to death.
Yeah.
And Ellie's kind of into it.
No,
like
scene.
No one's ever done that for her
before. She's looking over her shoulder, watching him do that, and at first she's the actress, actor there.
Yeah, Bella Ramsey is
nails that scene, man.
A flawless choice for this role.
Because she's watching it aghast, and then you watch her face slowly change from aghast to like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Like, that's fair game here. This world. That's what this world is now.
Well, and also, like, that guy is doing that to protect me.
Right.
She's never had that before.
Right. And if later on in the season, you really get into that, where she's really had nobody there. And at first, I feel like Joel resists taking the father role.
Oh, for sure. He has no interest in that.
And this whole
Joel is a much more broken man in the show than he is in the game.
He is. And is it episode 8 where he calls her baby girl?
Yeah, when he rescues her. Well, he doesn't rescue her. He finds her.
After she rescued herself.
In the cannibal camp.
Yeah. And he calls her baby girl. And that's when you realize, that's when the relationship changes. That's when you realize.
That's when he's accepted it.
Yeah. And he looks at her as his daughter, basically, that he needs to protect. And she starts to look up to him as a father figure at the very least. Although she had kind of done that.
She's already been there, but he was
there before
resisting.
him.
Yeah. He was resisting a lot more. Yep. I mean, he is, and you have to do it that way, I think, because one of the things that's notable about the notable difference with the show is the game is very much Joel's point of view because you are playing as Joel.
Right.
The show is not Joel's point of view.
No, you're right.
The show is a broader story.
Agreed.
And it is not afraid to leave Joel and Ellie and tell the story of other people in the world, to flash back to Jakarta at the day of the outbreak and kind of do all that. Like, it's a bigger tale. And it works on a level that the game can't really hit because the game is correctly limiting your point of view to the characters you're playing as. Yeah. The show gets to kind of go bigger than that, and it's greatly to its benefit very, very often. But in exchange for not having that empathy directly to the character you control, Joel has to be more closed off and more damaged to be be readable that way by the audience. Yep. And they do a very good job. And Pedro Pascal does a very good job of it.
Absolutely. Then we move on to episode 2, a flashback to 2 days before the worldwide outbreak. They're in Jakarta, Indonesia. The government has found one of the corpses, and there's a doctor there examining it. And
a mushroom, like a fungus expert.
Yep.
Like they call her in out of nowhere,
and she basically says, "Just burn the city down."
Yeah, nuke
she's like, "Just nuke the city."
She says, "Bomb it,
and
bomb the
right.
whole thing." And she's like, "And now I'd like to go home and spend the last
few days with my family."
Yeah. The other thing I didn't realize this until I played Resident Evil 2 yesterday. Resident Evil 2, the outbreak happens the same day.
No way.
September 26th.
Really?
Like, obviously the Resident Evil 1 events happened weeks earlier, but all the notes in the police station, there's a note from September 25th where they're like, oh, there's like weird people doing stuff in the town, and the shit hits the fan in Raccoon City on September 26th.
Crazy.
Which is the same day as where society collapses. And I wonder if that was intentional on Neil Druckmann's part. He would know that.
Yep.
He would know that's the same day, which is also Joel's birthday.
Yeah. So then it jumps back to the present, and Ellie's there with Joel and Tess. And that's when she explains to them that basically she's like one of the hopes for a vaccine or a cure for the cordyceps.
Yeah, Marlene said she's the key, basically.
And that's when their attitude towards Ellie starts to shift as well.
Yeah.
Because it was kind of standoffish.
Although Tess's shifts much more.
Yeah.
Like, Tess believes in it, and Joel's kind of like, what the hell? Like, come on. Like, Joel doesn't believe in anything
He's
anymore.
transactional.
Yeah.
He doesn't look at the world anymore of like emotion and human relationships.
He's just trying not to die.
He's like, what can I do today to make it to tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, Tess is a little softer.
Yeah. I think Tess was the same way until that.
Maybe.
Until because she is very. I mean, she's the one who says, "Let's go kill Robert." I mean,
you're right.
She is as hard as he is.
Yeah.
But something about you seeing Ellie is immune hits something with her that Joel has long ago put away.
Yep. So they travel to the State House, but they get there, they find that the Fireflies are all dead. And at that point, Tess reveals that she had been bitten in a prior skirmish.
Yeah, where they fought clickers.
Yep, the first clicker that you see in the show, which pivotal and powerful moment, to be sure. She reveals that she's been bitten. Joel shoots an infected, which alerts the swarm, and the swarm is coming after them. And Tess is laid up a little bit, and she's saying, I can't go with you, I'm going to be a hindrance, leave me behind, which is what she did in the video games, but instead, in the video games, it was Fedra who was coming.
Fedra had caught them,
and instead, it's a horde. And so,
the horde makes more sense.
It does. And she basically says, you guys go, I'm going to stay here, I'm going to take out as many as I can and delay as many as I can, and you guys go and live. And that's what happens.
Yep. And then she is horrifyingly kissed by one of the zombies with the tendrils in his mouth.
Literally
very well
stomach,
done.
Matt.
Because she can't get the lighter to light
in
time, and then she finally does, and the whole building blows up, and
she sacrifices herself.
Yeah, I mean, she goes out big.
She does. Yep. Still a sad moment. They had done a great job making me care about Tess in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, I mean,
and a lot of it was what you mentioned,
is very good.
The empathy that she had towards Ellie when Joel didn't. That ingratiated me to her a little bit.
Yeah, and that scene is another good example of how much more broken Joel is in the show, because in the game, when she reveals she's been bitten, Joel freaks out a little bit. He's like, oh my, like what? How long? And in the show, Joel's like, well, we got to go.
Transactional.
And she says something about like I know you could never feel or show me you feel the way that I feel. Like, basically, she implies that their relationship has basically been like it's transactional to him, and she did care for him, really, but like he never was able to come out of that. You know? And he's a profoundly damaged person. Yeah. And he just turns her and leaves. Like, he has no response to her going to die. And then not then, but later, obviously. But but in the game, that is one of the biggest differences in terms of Joel's like moment to moment responses to things. Is like game Joel really does show shock and
he wears
grief.
his heart on his sleeve more.
A little bit, yeah. And with her, like, not maybe with anybody else. Like, he's a hard man, but like he's not as closed off to Tess as he is in the show. And again, I do think that is a good change for the show.
Agreed.
I think you need him to have no one.
Yep. So before Tess dies, she tells them that they need to go meet with Bill and Frank. And later on, you find out that Bill and Frank are these partners that they have been working with, they've been bartering with and trading with.
Yeah, one of the big reveal. I mean, obviously, Bill didn't get all this backstory in the game. One of the big reveals in the show is you see that Joel and Tess have been together for at least 13 years.
Right. Yeah.
Which is not a thing I think we knew.
I don't think I knew that from the game at all.
I mean, clearly they knew each other well, but I don't like. That's a long time, especially in that world. Yeah. To be with somebody and count on somebody.
Yep. And so that transitions us into episode 3, which is one of the most iconic episodes from the season. It's basically all about the relationship between Bill and Frank. And they're a gay couple. They found each other. Yeah. They ended up having similar interests in like fashion and food.
And Bill is and piano.
Piano.
As always in this series, music is a very big deal. Is a very big form of connection to people. And
this is just, by the way, the Bill and Frank stuff, all completely redone from the game, basically.
Oh yeah, very, very. I mean, Frank hates him in the game. Like, I mean, obviously they've been together a long time, but Frank has basically come to the end of his rope and disagreed to the point that he has killed himself in the game. In the show, it's a very, very, very,
different
thing.
Yeah.
And it's a much more effective way. I mean, Bill serves the same purpose in terms of being a foil to Joel in the game, but it's more effective in this where you see Bill is a parallel to Joel in the game where he is a bitter, angry man who's lost everything and is completely alone. And there's an element in the game of like, well, Joel's not that far gone yet, but he could have been that. Mm-hmm. In the show, Bill is an example of how Joel could be if he didn't close himself off so much. Like Bill starts as closed off as Joel, if not more. I mean, the man is an anti-government, gun-hoarding, basement-dwelling, like survivalist, like prepper nut.
Yeah.
And he comes to be an incredibly loving husband to Frank.
Yeah.
And you can, the parallel there is that Joel could find that too, but Joel hasn't been able to, and Bill did.
Well, few people did. I mean, Bill and Frank live in this little utopia that they build for themselves.
Yeah, Bill had a plan, no doubt. I mean,
well, yeah, he sets up the clothing store and the little fake downtown,
and he sets up his own little farm, and he slaughters his own livestock. I mean, he's a great cook. Yeah. He's a great piano player. Like Bill is and you can see Bill. One of the reasons Bill is an isolated, shut off man is he grew up a gay man in that little town that probably was not super supportive.
Where he probably had to live his whole life. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's and the interactions with him and Joel are great. Where Bill just has a gun on him the whole time, and Joel's like, "You don't need to point that at me the whole dinner, really."
Yeah.
But it's Joel and him have common ground, but the common ground is literally the reason they can't quite trust each other.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Frank and Tess are just like, "Yeah, we'll get to do this." Tess and Frank are clearly the outgoing, like we need to create
Type
a human connection thing.
Yeah.
It's an amazing episode. It's an astounding piece of work. It will be in the Emmy conversation, top to bottom. And
I agree, it's an amazing episode. But I do have a question.
And I can't remember. I'm blanking on the name of the actor who plays Bill.
Oh, I don't remember it either. I saw him on Twitter the next day after his big episode, though, and he was like, "Thanks, everybody."
He will win an Emmy for that.
Yeah,
no doubt.
It's an amazing episode, written, acting, and everything. I do feel a little bit like it was a stunt episode, though, because when I first watched it, it felt a little bit out of character for the first couple episodes, because one, Joel and Ellie are hardly in it. Mm-hmm. It's pretty much all Bill and Frank. And then I thought to myself, I'm like, this seems out of place. I like the message that it's sending. I like that they're focusing on a gay couple. And it was just a great episode in general as a standalone thing. But then I was like, how is this going to fit into the show? What's the relevance of this, other than ultimately Joel and Ellie get there after they're dead and they take their battery and all their resources and they go? But I've wondered how does this cascade into the rest of the season? And it ultimately really didn't.
Oh, I don't agree with that.
Okay, then explain to me how you feel it did.
I think, well, as I said, I think Bill is a foil to Joel in terms of what Joel could have become or could become if he opens up again or finds a reason to open up again. There's a definite parallel between Bill and Frank and Joel and Ellie. You can see that warming up, at least in Ellie's side when she's reading the letter to him at the end. There is also the parallel of we get to see a little more about what happened to the world over the course of the 20 years skip, which is valuable, and what happened outside of Fedra zones. Clearly there's humanity out there somewhere.
It does show that some people managed to cobble together a kind of normal life.
It's also notable that it supports what you said earlier about the zombies aren't really that dangerous. After the initial outbreak and once everything kind of settles in, the threat becomes people.
Yeah.
Right down to when Joel's like, they're going to come for you. They're going to do, and that's also
your defenses.
You're going to come for your, and also that's the first hint that Joel knows that stuff because he used to do it.
Right.
And I also like that, it shows that it is possible to have a good, quote unquote, good life in this horrible end of time. It embodies the title, The Last of Us. The last of humanity, the last of, and it's an important, just in terms of kind of representational storytelling. I can count on one hand the number of times I have seen a gay couple live to old age and die on their terms in media.
Yeah,
that is just super rare, and the fact they're able to do that was and would do it with grace.
Yeah.
Is it a stunt? A little bit. There's clearly an element of we have the creative freedom to take a huge detour and tell this man's story in a way we couldn't in the game and maybe couldn't in any other situation outside of like a spin-off comic book or something. And yeah, but the thing is, does it matter that much that it's a stunt when it was able to bring that much genuine emotion and feeling and storytelling verve to it? I don't think it does.
I agree with you on that. It was an amazing episode.
And the other part, of course, now that we're done with the series, everything that needed to be in that show about Joel and Ellie is in there. Like, they did not remove other stuff that Joel. I mean, guys, we could have seen them sneak through 4 more clicker nests.
Right.
I mean, in the game,
it becomes too gamey.
In the game, it's just you know, them and Bill have a fetch quest where they you know they. I
mean, Bill's role in the game is so rudimentary compared to the show. Like, I didn't take any of that away from Bill when I hung out. Like, I remember I found like the gay porn magazine. I was like, oh, he's gay. Like, I got that from the game.
It's in there. But it's like it's subtext and it's not. You know, and there's a moment where Joel kind of like he's gone and he's like, yeah, whatever. Like, like Bill is a very different character in the game because Bill never reopens up, and that's part of what Frank's suicide note or death note basically says. You know, he was never able to be that to Frank. And in the show, he is. And that's a much more interesting contrast to Joel and Ellie. Like, one way or the other, Bill and Frank are showing, you know, every pair of characters they meet is highlighting some kind of aspect of Joel and Ellie's relationship. Everyone, the brothers they meet later, even what's her name, Kathleen later is highlighting highlighting the pitfalls of authority and all that. And she's another, you know, cautionary. You know, they're looking for a place to be. They're looking for another. That's another cautionary tale of like, because why does she get so upset? Because of what happened to her brother. What is Joel doing? Looking for his brother. What happens if they find Tommy and he's gone? What does Joel do?
Well, then Henry
does he become
had killed her brother basically?
Right. So what does and how does Joel feel about Henry if he's killing people's brother? You know, like that's that whole foil situation, and like obviously it's more direct with the characters they meet face to face. But in the end, the Bill situation in the game and the show is they get a truck. That's the end result. So either you can do sort of like this extended action sequence through Bill's town, or you can tell this beautiful story of these two people. And for the game, you get the action-filled fetch quest, and in the show, you get this beautiful story. And it also prefigures Episode 7, Left Behind, which was has a lot of parallels to it.
It does, I just think it's also just base level. It's just great to expose people to a gay relationship. You gotta realize there's a lot of people out across America and across the world who are never exposed to this. Like, we live in California. Like, once you live in California for like a couple years, it's just life. But you realize you live in rural Kentucky or rural Idaho, or you don't even
10 miles west of Boston. Apparently.
Seriously, like you don't experience it, and so it becomes like this alien thing to people. And I feel like having an episode dedicated to this in a show that's as popular as The Last of Us and as good as The Last of Us, I think can do a lot to shift perceptions across large swaths of people. So I'm not begrudging that episode at all. I agree with some of the stuff you're saying. It still feels a little bit of like an outlier to me, but I don't care. It's worth it for a million other reasons.
I mean, it is a structurally interesting thing to do. It was a great piece of fucking art.
Yeah,
I mean, it is an unorthodox thing to do structurally. Especially since the other two flashbacks in the show have been basically the cold opens,
right?
Which is what I was expecting at first. And then it just kept going. And then it just kept going, and you're like, oh, like this is interesting. Like especially one of the strengths it has is it's so different from the game that I was like, okay, I have no idea what you're doing now. I'm in. Let's see what happens. And there's some really great moments in it. And part of me, I remember at the end when they both take the poison. At first, I was like, oh, like Bill's not going to die from it.
And they survive it, you mean?
I was thinking, oh, Bill's not going to wake up the next morning.
I kind of thought that too.
And that when Joel and Ellie get there, he's going to be basically
groggy, but there.
I thought that was going to
as well.
But no, like, it's better that way.
And
like,
better,
the letter is really great. And having Ellie read it until she can't read it anymore and has to give it to Joel is great. Like, and Joel, again, you are stripping everything away from Joel. Joel, even the minor things that Joel could consider that he has. He is losing it all on the way through. This trip with Ellie, obviously Ellie had nothing to do with what happened to Bill and Frank, but over the course of this thing he's agreed to do for Ellie and with Ellie, everything he has is going away. Like, he can't go back to Boston.
Yeah.
Tess is dead.
Yeah. Well, why would he go back?
Yeah, there's no reason.
Nothing there.
Like, he has no allies.
Wyoming or wherever.
Bill and Frank are gone. He doesn't know what's happened to his brother. Like, the end of this road might be he delivers Ellie to these people.
And then what?
Now what?
Yeah. I thought that the whole season. Like, what happens to him once he gets there? And I don't want to jump ahead too far, but they start asking those questions as well.
I mean, it's a hard week for Joel.
Yeah.
This all happens in like 6 days.
Yep. So they get the truck, and they head off. They're traveling through Missouri.
And Ellie doesn't know how a seatbelt works.
Yeah. Because it's so bizarre because she's grown up since all hell broke loose.
Yeah.
So she doesn't know how simple things, like, what's basketball? Like, what's any of this stuff? Like, because it hasn't been a part of society since she's been alive.
It's also interesting to like have the outbreak happen in 2003 when a whole bunch of things haven't happened. Mm-hmm. So like, you don't have iPhones. Yeah. You don't have really MP3 players. Yeah. You don't. Her prized possession in the flashback in episode 7 is a Discman or Walkman. Yeah. Like it's a remarkable thing. Like it's the change in setting is actually
honestly,
but it works.
Oh yeah,
and it works in a weird way.
It also makes her a naivety and an innocence about Ellie that is this huge juxtaposition against what she's doing in her day-to-day life at this point. Like, it humanizes her a lot, and it doesn't feel like there's any humans in this show because, again, going back to what we were saying earlier, the danger is the other humans at this point. It's not really the infected, although the infected seem to show up at all the right times.
Although not as often as you might think.
Yep. Episode 4, they're traveling through Missouri. They take a detour through Kansas City, and they replace Pittsburgh with Kansas City. Mm-hmm. This whole episode is off the map. Not a part of the video game, really, at all.
I mean, it's basically the bit where they run into the hunters,
right?
Combined with when they run into Henry and Sam.
Yep.
Which makes a lot of sense. Like, those don't have to be separate things, and they add a lot more. They add a ticking clock to it, which makes it a lot more dramatically interesting. They mushed a bunch of ideas that were separate in the game into one mini story, and I thought it worked pretty well.
Yeah, I thought it was brilliant how they did it. Mm-hmm. Honestly, one of my favorite characters in the whole season comes in here in Kansas City. So they get ambushed. They kill.
Never stop in Kansas City, kids. That's the lesson here.
They get ambushed in Kansas City. They kill a couple of the people who ambushed them. As it turns out, they are the soldiers of this horrible leader named Kathleen. Just an amazing villain. Like, she scared the shit out of me. Like, I was like, damn. Like, there's these moments where they're like trying to extract information out of these people in the room. And they're like, if you work with us, we'll let you off. And then, like, she kills them all.
Yeah, and except the doctor.
Yeah.
And then the doctor, like, they
think Joel.
That's the ceiling
thing. Her soldiers. They think Joel is working with this other guy, Henry, who actually did kill her brother in a roundabout way.
Because her brother was like the inspirational figure who was. Because they seems like fairly recently overthrew Fedra.
Right.
And they had kind of a resistance going, and her brother was running it and sort of the inspirational figure behind it, but couldn't really get the ball rolling on it. Mm-hmm. And after he was killed by Henry, she was so mad that she basically kicked it into gear, and they took over.
Right.
And now her only goal is to find the guy who killed her brother and kill him.
Because the irony here is that you're technically kind of fighting on the same side. Like, you both hate Fedra. And she's fighting Fedra.
And her right-hand man is the guy who played Tommy in the game.
Right. Yeah.
Like, a little cameo. Marlene is played by the same woman who played her in the game as well, because she actually aged up enough in the 10 years to play her. Little cameos here and there. But yeah, Kathleen's a very effective villain, in part because, as there are no real straight villains in this story. Like, there is an element of her where you're like, yeah, I get it from your point of view. And then Henry even admits, like, yeah, I was a traitor. Like, he was like, I am a traitor. Like, I was working for both sides. I just thought I was doing what I thought was right and what I needed to do for my brother, because his brother needed help.
Yep.
And and there's that great scene where she's thinking about whether anything she's done is right or it's effective or matters or anything. And her right hand guy, Tommy from the game, is like, whatever you say, we're with you. So something about this woman inspires loyalty and confidence in these men. And so, like, from outside as people rooting for Joel and Ellie, we hate her. We don't want to, but because she's in their way. But like clearly, if you're in her group, there's something about her that makes you want to follow her.
And
yeah, there's a charisma to it, which we don't really get. I don't think we really get that necessarily. But they, to them, she got them out of this horrible situation, and it looks like they're in another horrible situation because that the regular people are just run by another group of tyrants, basically.
Right.
But the people that are working for her are now the tyrants, and sometimes the only difference between tyranny and freedom is who gets to be the tyrant.
Yep,
and that's
true.
That's a really good flip, and it has no equivalent in the game.
It's true.
Like that whole situation is completely different.
Yeah, it's all new.
Because the hunters you run into in the game are just basically bandits.
They aren't tied to any.
No, they're just trying to kill and rob whoever comes through.
Yep. And so Joel and Ellie end up sneaking, something they end up doing often in season 1, sneak into a high rise.
Yeah. This is also after Ellie. This is the first crack in the ice with Joel. Is he's gonna lose to this kid who's struggling with him, and Ellie comes out and shoots the kid.
Ellie shoots him with the gun she
stole
from Bill and Frank's
about.
house that he didn't know about. But they have a discussion. He gives her the gun back, which is, to your point, the ice is broken. He's like, okay, I trust you enough for you to have your own gun now.
Yeah, and he even says, he's like, I didn't hear him because I've lost so much hearing.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm too old for this, and I've lost hearing.
I need you to help me now. Yeah.
So he realizes.
So they go to sleep in his high rise, and the episode ends with Henry, who we didn't know who he was at the time.
No, we saw Sam's drawings everywhere.
And they wake up, and there's this guy holding him at gunpoint. And that's where the episode ends. On to episode 5, we find out that the people holding them gunpoint is Henry and his brother Sam. Is that his name?
I think it is.
I think it's right.
I hope it is, or I've been saying it wrong the whole time.
And that's when you start figuring out, okay, Henry killed Kathleen's brother, and that's why Kathleen wants to kill him. And they go and to this like abandoned farmhouse, and all hell kind of breaks loose. And here's one thing I will say. So Kathleen, I love to hate her. Great villain. But the way the show is, she came and went so quickly, Matt. Like, this is one drawback to the show. Is that in a game, I feel like you have time to develop characters more and the villains more. You may spend, like, because you have these fights that last for a couple hours, and you get a cutscene, you have a fight that lasts for 30 minutes, and you have a cutscene, you interact with the characters a lot more than you do. And again, Kathleen wasn't in the game, so it's hard to kind of draw direct parallels. But in a game, you generally have more exposure to a villain before they're just killed off. And in episode 5, at the end, they end up at this farmhouse, and the Horde just shows up and just wipes out Kathleen and her whole squad.
Although they earn that because they know they're down there.
Yeah.
Like, there's a whole thing where they're like, there's
something growing
there's
down
a giant sinkhole in the basement.
Right.
She's like, we have to find Henry first. Like,
she was obsessed with finding Henry first.
The obsession over that kind of
and that
sinks
cost
it.
him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which ended up being poor leadership on her part.
I do think, I mean, this show moves like a bat. It
does, yeah.
And I don't really have, because there's not much else I need to know about Kathleen, really. And part of the issue here, I thought about this because, like, I've felt that, and I've heard, had people say, it's like, oh wow, that really happened fast. I'm going to argue that everything in this show happens at about the speed it should, but we are so used to long, drawn-out bullshit in TV shows.
From shows?
From Netflix, like Netflix shit.
Yeah.
You know how many years it would have taken Netflix to tell this story?
Well, even in
5.
Well, the analog here, I think, is The Walking Dead.
Yeah.
They'll introduce a villain. I mean, the villain is a villain for, like, the next 15 episodes.
Yeah.
And there's an arc that they
even
go through with the villain before there's a culmination. This is like an episode and a half. And I think the other thing that maybe made me look at it a little differently is later on, and we'll get to it here in a second, you run into David, the preacher, the cannibal, or whatever. That whole thing felt very frivolous to me. That also felt like a stunt, that episode. And after that episode was over, and like it all kind of just, the whole arc happens in one episode, and it's over, I'm like, you know what? I would have preferred if they had just stuck around with Kathleen's crew for another episode.
Oh, no, I wouldn't.
No?
No, I had plenty of them. They'd served their purpose.
Okay.
Like, they did what they did. And the David thing, I could see dragging the David thing out to 2 episodes.
See, I felt that arc was fine because it's like you came across these crazies who worship a preacher.
Yeah,
they ran out of
story.
food. They're eating humans. Like, I don't know. I didn't think there was a lot of depth to explore there.
I mean,
Plus, the way she finished it, he tries to rape her. She kills him with
they lean into that way more in the show.
They do,
which makes sense.
It's powerful. That was a powerful scene when you realize they're in this building burning down, and you see the shift in his face of like, oh, I'm gonna rape you now.
Yeah,
when the fire's burning around him. Like, that was just powerful, man. I was like, oh, shit.
And I think we're getting ahead of ourselves on that, but, like, the change on that where, like, and I was talking about this with some people about how, like, because I have some friends who watch this and they love it, but they've never played the game. They don't know anything about the game. And I was saying, like, in the show, she hacks David to bits and then runs out into the outside, and Joel finds her there. In the game, Joel runs into the burning building right as she's hacking David up and grabs her then. Yeah. And they were like,
big difference.
And they were like, "Oh, why would you change? What would you change that?" I'm like, "Well, to some degree, I think it's better to have Ellie finish that without being interfered with, because she does that way. She does it all herself. Like, that's all her own thing."
Yeah.
And I'm like, and one of the maybe that was always something that they wanted to do, but in the game, if you do that, you have to make a whole outdoor area just for that one scene.
Yeah.
And it might have just been more budget conscious, time conscious to have him run into the room that you'd already built.
Yep.
There is actually a little more freedom in a live action show than in a game, because you actually have to build the literal entire world.
I can understand that. Yep.
So yeah, that all was very, very effective. That guy who played David was phenomenally good.
He was pretty good. Like, again, that turn in his face.
That turn is really good. Yeah. He goes from being and like that. He plays basically 4 different versions of himself.
He does,
in that show.
Yeah,
depending on who he's
playing the role.
Yeah,
depending on who he's talking to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you start to see the little flashes.
And you start to understand how he's managed to convince.
And why he's in charge.
Yeah,
like for sure.
Why he's the head honcho in charge of the cult. On to episode 5, so they escape with Henry and his son Sam. Henry manages to convince them to help each other to get out of the city, because he said he knows the way through these subway tunnels or something,
which everyone thinks is full of zombies.
And Joel is very reluctant to join up with them because it seems like I've been down this road before and it hasn't turned out too good. But,
and you're talking, I mean, Henry has straight up said, "I was a traitor." Like, and Joel doesn't trust anybody already.
Yep.
So, but mainly, like, I think the thing that convinces Joel to go with it is how much Ellie and Sam get along.
They become best friends, pretty much like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Sam
takes us down this other
and Sam, by the way,
pathway.
Sam, by the way, is deaf.
Yeah.
Which he's not in the game.
Yeah.
But he's played by an actual deaf actor.
He is,
which is very, and a bunch of the actors learn sign language to kind of
communicate with him.
It's a really good. It's a cool change that adds a little extra and adds a little more horror. I think, where it's like, oh, can you imagine being in that world?
Yeah.
And not being able to hear?
Yeah.
Like, terrifying.
Yep. So they end up fighting some infected in the underground, including a large bloater. And that's the one that beheads Perry and wipes out Kathleen's crew. Let's see.
Who come out right as Kathleen has them cornered.
Right. And I like how he rips Perry's head off.
Yeah. And that is that's also where that
was quite the scene, man.
They get the sniper
unceremoniously. He's like, this dude that you thought might be in this show for the rest of the season. No, I'm just gonna rip his head right off.
We also get the sniper rifle coverage scene, which in the game is Ellie, but in this it's Joel picking people off as the others try to run for cover.
Up, but then he gets there. He realizes that the sniper's talking to Kathleen. They show up. The horde wipes them all out. Yep.
And that's also the first time when he finds the sniper. That's the first time Joel ever shows reluctance to hurt somebody.
Yeah.
Is he says, please don't make me.
Yeah.
And the guy goes for it and he shoots him.
Yeah.
But that's the first time in the whole show, post the 20-year jump, that Joel has shown any like reluctance to do that.
Yeah.
Which
Humanity.
is significant.
In all honesty.
And then he spends most of his time trying to protect Ellie with the gun. He's not. He's no longer thinking strategically and tactically. He's thinking, how do I get her out of this?
Yeah.
And it's notable. I also believe that scene, because when Ellie gets in the car and then the little girl infected comes after her, I think that might be the only instance of a stalker in the show. Because there's four types of infected in Last of Us 1, which is the runner. There's the runners.
The runners, the clickers, the
clickers, the bloaters, and the stalkers.
Yeah. And you're right. That may have been the only one.
And I think the little girl is a stalker because she knows Ellie's there, even though Ellie's not making any noise.
Right.
Because clickers are echolocation.
Right.
But the stalkers still have some, vision.
Yeah.
And if they see you, they wake up and come at you. They're basically like stealth tests in a way that the clickers are not.
Yep.
So I think I saw her and I'm like, oh, well, Ellie's not making noise, so it's okay. And then she just looks right at her. I'm like, oh, it's a stalker. Like, stalkers are my least favorite thing to fight in the games.
Because they're fast.
Because they're fast and dangerous, and they alert each other.
Right.
Where clickers don't really do that.
Yeah.
So I think I in my head, I think that was the only stalker we saw on the show.
Yeah. So the four of them escape to a motel.
Also, how cool is it that bloater was a real person in a suit?
Oh, yeah.
CG.
That was real? That wasn't CG?
It's CG enhanced in places, but that's a guy in a suit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Practical effects for the win. So they escape to a motel. At that point, Sam shares with Ellie, because they have become very close friends very quickly, that he was bitten. It was a horrible moment. I was just like, no.
And you know it's coming because you played the game, but like, here we are.
It still hurt.
Yeah.
And then this is a diversion from the game, tries to heal him. She cuts her hand and tries to get her blood into the bite to see if maybe she can cure him. They cut to the next morning. Sam's sitting on the bed. He turns. Nope, he has turned. And he is, in fact, a zombie. And then another horrible scene.
There's a theory that people have brought up that because he's facing away from her, he's like sitting on the bed facing away from her, and there are people who have like proposed the idea that he intentionally sat facing that way because he knew when he turned he wouldn't be able to hear her breathing and wouldn't attack her until she was awake.
Wow. Well, then it just gets even more intense because his older brother finds out that he's turned and shoots him. And then
after not allowing Joel to,
shoots him, and then realizing what he's done, turns the gun on himself and shoots himself. Just brutal. Just the roller coaster of emotions.
Almost shot for shot, like the game.
It is. That's one of the points where they pretty much
they knew they didn't need to. Yeah, that was always very effective.
Yeah, they didn't need to mess with it, and they didn't. And even after having experienced it already 2 times, playing the game twice, and then getting it the third time in the show, it wasn't any easier to deal with.
And it happens so fast. There's that shock of like, wait, what? Did really? Okay.
Yeah.
Like,
it's awful. It really is awful.
And then they bury them, and that's the first. Because Ellie's kind of Ellie's not really very affected by things for the most part.
Yeah, she's almost like a sociopath.
And this is the first time you see that the idea that she could be the key to something important is important to her. Like, or they bury them, and you can see she's devastated that her attempt to heal him didn't work.
Yeah.
And she, writes he had a
she
little.
starts to doubt.
Yeah.
That she actually is secure.
That she's of any use.
Yeah.
Or what's the point of life at that point? And and he had Sam had a little the little erasable board thing where he wrote stuff on. Yeah. And she writes "I'm sorry" on it and puts it on the grave and says "Let's go." And like she wants to leave faster than Joel does, and Joel's like, "What the?" Joel doesn't really understand what's happening there.
Yeah, that whole section of the show.
So that's your really foreshadowing that like. That's an important foreshadowing for how the season's going to end in terms of what the Fireflies want to do to her.
Yep. Move to episode 6. Jumps 3 months forward. Joel and Ellie have found a small community in Jackson, Wyoming, where Joel is reunited with his brother Tommy. So mission accomplished, right? You found his brother.
Yeah, this episode was interesting in part because my friends who hadn't played the game were blown away by this episode.
Why?
Because they thought that finding Tommy was going to be the climax of the season.
Oh.
They thought like that was going to be the last episode of the series of the season. And so after this episode.
Like, now what?
Well, because they're like, well, after this episode, even a couple of my friends, including one who knows filmmaking and story stuff intensely. Like, you can't fool him on things most of the time. And after that, and so at the end of this, obviously after they leave, like there's Joel's injured, like in the game, and he thought Joel was dead. And he was like, I have no idea what the rest of this show is going to be.
Right.
And even then, after that, he had no idea. And it was fun to watch him have no idea where this story was going for the first time in I don't know how long. Because this is a guy who's so immersed in story all the time that it's hard to surprise him. And this show did it. I was, and of course, he's like, I can't believe Joel's dead. I guess that's why Pedro Pascal signed up for more Mandalorian. I'm like, not saying anything.
No,
not telling you. No spoilers here. Yeah.
So anyway, they get there. They have a reunion with Tommy. I don't know. The reunions, it seems like they're more friendly than they were in the game.
I mean, Joel's definitely happier to... I mean, there is a similar... A little bit, but also, like... I think also Joel is... Because, like, in the game... The town isn't established the way it is here. Like the town in the show is more like it is in Last of Us Part 2. Yeah. Where it's like it's a walled city. You know, it's a real community.
With the infected.
Whereas in the game, basically if I remember right, they're about to go retake the dam. Right. So they can have electricity, and that's sort of the beginning of what that becomes 5 years later.
It's a different spin for sure.
But it's neat because you're looking at that and you're like, oh, I guess you are planning to do season 2, huh? Because you basically did this set, and that set was actually more of a town they found that they enhanced in places, because you can find that kind of thing in Colorado. It turns out. But it was a really cool episode to see all that stuff and see all those characters. I do think there's a moment where they're feeding them, and some girl comes in and looks in, and Ellie's like, "What the fuck are you looking at? Get out of here!" I think that's Dina.
Oh, really?
I think it's a young Dina.
Oh, interesting.
From the love interest from 5 years later.
Yeah. Well, the other twist is that Tommy's wife, Maria, is pregnant, which she wasn't in the game.
No.
And that changes everything, because that is ultimately the excuse that he uses to not continue the adventure on with Joel and Ellie. Joel tries to get Tommy to take her the rest of the way to the Fireflies.
And Tommy agrees.
At first, but then, and this is a great scene too, when Ellie realizes that Joel's going to slough her off, and she goes to him to plead with him.
Well, also because while she's with his wife, Tommy's wife, she finds out about Sarah.
Right, and that changes.
And now she understands something key about Joel. And what is going on.
Yeah. Overall, I thought this was probably the worst episode of the season. I mean, I understand it's necessary, but it just, as far as entertainment value, it's
doing a lot of heavy lifting. And getting you to
setting up.
It's getting you to the last third. Yeah, it's getting you to the last third of the story, and it's interesting to me because it's where Joel shows a lot of vulnerability finally in front of his brother, probably the only person on the planet he'd be willing to do that with. He basically begs him to take over, because Joel reveals that he is afraid that Ellie's going to die because he's not good enough to do this anymore. Like I'm too slow. I didn't hear the kid coming up on me. Like he's afraid that he's going to screw up and Ellie's going to die, which is a much more understandable fear than I just don't want to be close to anybody because something happened 20 years ago. It's a more human reaction. And then I prefer in the show the version they do of how he ends up going with Ellie instead of Tommy, where he just shows up in the stable next to the horse and says, "You deserve a choice." And she's like, "Get on the fucking horse." So I like that a lot. It is a little bit of meandering, but again, it's doing the thing where it shows like, hey, existence not in a hell world is possible here. Like clearly, it's not an ideal situation. I love the scene, the bit where like Tommy is forced to realize that they're in a communist commune. It's literally a commune. It's a communist. Like,
it was funny.
It's like Tommy hadn't thought about that. Really.
One thing I will say too about this season in general, there's not a lot of levity. It probably could use a little more of that type of stuff.
I mean, the pun book is sort of your main thing.
They kind of use that as the crutch for it,
and also because the lack of levity is sort of reflected in Joel, and when Joel starts playing along, which really happens in the night they spend before Henry and Sam get the drop on them, is the first time he really opened, kind of laughs when they're laying there, at that. Like that, they use that very sparingly, which I think is smart. I would be surprised to see that continue in the future, because I think Ellie and her friends in the second game are funnier people with each other.
So they head off for Utah for a hospital in Utah where they think the Fireflies are.
Well, first they go south because they're going south to University where the Fireflies are supposed to be studying stuff.
But they get there, they're gone.
Get there, everyone's gone. Just like in the game, they're all gone, and then they see 4 scavengers, bandits or scavengers wandering around, and they try to get out.
And then Joel ends up getting stabbed in a struggle with them. In the game is different, though. He didn't get stabbed by the raiders in the game. He fell off a balcony onto a piece of steel. Yeah, he's struggling with one of them, and they fall off a thing, and he gets impaled by rebar. Yeah.
This, I think, is better because it gives you the shock moment of...
Well, it also matters later because that person is one of David's disciples or whatever.
I think that was in the game too.
Was it?
Those 4 guys were related to David's
Were they
group.
in the game? Okay.
I just think if I remember right in the game, I killed all of them. Because, I mean, come on.
Yeah. So he's stabbed. She is like, holy shit, man. Mm-hmm. This is the moment it hits her that without Joel, she can't survive. Mm. And she's like, holy shit, the guy who's supposed to protect me, I have to protect him now. Mm-hmm. She takes him down into the basement of a house, tries to heal him, doesn't have much luck. Move on to episode 7. This episode starts out with an amazing flashback that also wasn't in the game of Ellie as a young girl at Fedra school with her best friend Riley. And she's like in gym class, like that's where you're introduced to her Walkman. And as it turns out, like Fedra was actually putting kids through school, and like she goes in and talks to the guidance counselor, and she's like, you're a disaster, but you're a leader.
Yeah,
like,
they're basically training them to be officers,
soldiers and officers. And he basically tells her, like, you're on track to be an officer. You're not going to be a grunt, so get your shit together.
And you'll never have to listen. You'll never have to take an order again,
right?
Basically.
Yeah, because she's a rebel, and she's...
Meanwhile, Riley reveals that she was going to be put on sewer guard duty or something like that.
Riley's her best friend, and Riley disappears. And she comes back after 3 weeks and tells Ellie that she has joined the Fireflies, and she's going to be posted in Ohio, I think it was.
They're sending her out somewhere else.
And she's like, basically, this is our last night together. And so she takes Ellie to this mall, and the whole trip from their house or their building to the mall, I don't think that was in the game.
You do walk it a little bit, but it's shorter.
I didn't remember it. I just thought you just ended up at the mall.
No, I remember climbing over some stuff and having they're having that conversation back and forth.
But I don't think the guy with the liquor was in the game, was he? The dead guy who killed himself with pills and liquor? I don't think he was in the game.
I can't remember. I only played the Left Behind DLC once.
Okay. So anyway, they go, and that's what this whole episode is, the Left Behind DLC. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much all contained into one episode. They go to the mall. She shows her the 4 wonders of the mall or whatever.
5
wonders.
Because the escalator. The escalator is amazing, too, which is a great moment because you're like, yeah, of course a kid never seen that.
Never seen one before. Yeah,
just running up and down the stairs. Yeah, absolutely.
And they have their moment. They kiss, and then they're attacked.
Yeah, I will say. One of my nitpicks on this episode is that is not what a 2003 mall arcade looks like.
it doesn't, yeah.
The mall arcade is... It's just legions of pristine early 80s classic arcade games, including a very rare Tetris arcade game in the middle entrance, and then a Mortal Kombat 2 machine.
Yep.
That is like the game that she's obsessed with. In the game, it's a made up game that is a Mortal Kombat equivalent game.
Yeah,
and then they got the real Mortal Kombat 2 for this one. And that's how some people like, how would they know what Mortal Kombat 2 is? I'm like, they found fucking magazines.
Yeah.
It's 2003. The magazines weren't that old yet. That game was only like 10 years old at that point.
That's a great scene too, the arcade scene.
Oh yeah, it's like a magical realism scene almost, where they're finally playing these things they'd only heard about. It's also a bone
for people like us.
Oh sure. Yeah. I also appreciate that whoever they borrowed those games from would not let them age up those games.
Yeah.
Like,
you're not distressing these games.
This arcade magically did not age in 20 years.
You're not screwing up my arcade machine.
Because we know if it was really an arcade from 2003, it would be 4 skee-ball machines, a bunch of pinball tables nobody plays, a really fucked up Ms. Pac-Man cocktail cabinet that nobody can get a coin into, tons of Daytona USA and House of the Dead and Time Crisis machines, 4 Street Fighter machines nobody plays anymore, and it wouldn't be Mortal Kombat 3. It would be the ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 machine that they cannot sell to anyone. That's what that would be.
Yeah,
but it's a beautiful like little encapsulation of the other thing that several of my female friends have pointed out to me about because they point out the Victoria's Secret is like, oh, people took all the shoes but they didn't care about lingerie. The first thing people would need is functioning bras. Like, I mean, yes, the lingerie
Secret does not sell functioning bras.
Oh, yeah, they do. Yeah, they do.
According to my wife, they do not.
Nah,
she says their bras are all for looks and no work.
They have both, from what I understand. But yeah, and even then, you would rather have one than none.
Yeah, so absolutely. Like, I would, if I was a girl, I'd be like, like
the lingerie bodysuits in the window they're looking at probably would still, nobody would want that. Yeah. But like the rest of it, yeah, you if you want the Payless shoes, you'd also want the cheap underwear, like no question. But it's a really cool sequence with like
the whole thing is
the whole thing's great.
It really is, yeah.
Even
for people like us who grew up in mall culture and again, is a bone for people like
as they dance around in the Halloween store on the strongest counter glass ever installed.
And then it all goes wrong. They get attacked. They both get bitten. They decide that they're going to just stay together and die together.
Lose their minds together.
The exact words. And then cut to present day, where Ellie finds a sewing needle and begins sewing up Joel's wound.
Because Joel's telling her to run.
He
to get
tells
away.
her to leave, go,
and
I'm going to die.
she thinks about it, and then the whole flashback to Riley basically takes place in the moment she's got her hand on the doorknob of the basement door. And she decides, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yep.
And both because she, turned back and wouldn't leave Riley, and also because, she was so hurt by Riley having to leave her. And she's like, no, I'm not letting you. It's the reverse of what she yells at Joel the episode before about everyone who I've ever cared about has either left or died except for fucking you.
Yeah.
And so she's going to stick it out.
Yep. Cut to episode 8, penultimate episode.
Pedro Pascal's favorite episode. Oh, no, the 7 was his favorite episode because he gets to just sleep the whole time.
He wasn't even really in it.
He's just laying down under a blanket.
Episode 8, Joel is still in a bad way, laying in the basement of the house, even though she stitched him up. She goes out to hunt for food, and in the game, I think she used a bow.
Yeah, she's got a bow and arrow in the game.
But in the show, she uses a gun, which which is important because she goes and shoots the deer, and the deer ends up running to David, the cult leader, and one of his cronies, who is...
It's Troy Baker.
So who is the voice of Joel in the video game.
It's a little weird to hear Joel's... because Troy doesn't sound exactly like Joel. He's not, unless he's doing the Texas accent.
Yeah.
But he does sound enough like him that if you've played the game, you're like...
like Joel's talking to Joel right now.
Joel's kind of Joel-y right now. He's very good. I know Troy doesn't do a lot of live-action acting, but I thought he did a very good job.
Yep. And so she meets David and one of his cronies, and they agree to trade the deer because they found the deer. She had shot it. It ran away. She tracked it. She gets to the dead deer, and they're there.
Yeah.
They had also found the deer.
Also, David sees a potential victim.
Right. And so they barter. She says, I'll trade you drugs to help heal Joel for the deer.
She wants penicillin, basically.
Yep. So he sends his crony off to get the penicillin. He comes back, gives it to her. She leaves. They go back to their camp with the deer, and they're like, wait. So the guy who had stabbed Joel was one of their other cronies.
Yeah.
And they're like, wait a minute, he killed our people. We have to kill him. And so David, to his credit, tries to fight it and says, no, maybe we should leave him alone. And then he gives in.
And in the process, by the way, there's the scene where I like how subtly they do the thing where you cut back after the scenes with the deer and Ellie and David, and it cuts back and they're the whole thing is they're looking for food because they have no food, and then it cuts back to the kitchen and they're cutting up
humans.
They're cutting up meat, and they're like, what is it? Venison. And it's because earlier on there's a sad child because her father has died, and we want to bury him, and they're like, oh, the ground's frozen, we can't bury him until spring
because they're eating him.
Yeah, because they're gonna eat him. And so this pun doesn't work tremendously well outside of text, but someone was like, oh, it's venison. I'm like, yes, it's made of deer. Yeah.
You pick up pretty quickly as the viewer that they're eating humans.
Yeah, because right after you see them cutting up all this fresh meat, after complaining about how they don't have anything to eat, David come in with a deer, and you're like, oh.
And there's even a couple people that you see that are like, wait a minute.
Some of those people know.
Yeah,
for sure.
They're figuring it out. So,
and the little girl's figuring it out too.
Yeah.
And then she says something about, and he slaps the shit out of her.
Right. Yeah.
And you start to see the cracks in the kindly. The kindly preacher, pastor leader, and you're like, oh, okay, this is a cult.
Yep. And then we kind of talked about the rest of the episode already. He puts Jolie. I just combined both of them into one person. He puts Ellie into a cage and tries to convince her to join the cult. She basically says, F you. Spits at him.
Literally. Breaks his finger.
Breaks his finger when he tries to reach, which is so dumb. He put his hand on the cage. I'm like, what are you doing, dumbass? He's gonna, I thought she was gonna grab his arm, pull it in, and then break his arm in half.
He's a pedophile narcissist. He thinks he's pretty awesome.
Yeah, well.
He thought he got through to her.
And he did not.
He did not.
Yep. She gets out. And the rest is what we mentioned earlier. They get in a skirmish. She ends up killing him with a gigantic butcher knife.
Meanwhile, Joel
tries to rape her.
Joel started to wake up because she got the penicillin into him, and he as the the hunting party basically finds him and he kills them all
of them.
Tortures a couple of them, rips one of their kneecaps off, and then like says, "You gonna tell me where this place is?" And he points to the thing. And he just kills. He was telling the truth, and he's like, "Nah, I believe him."
Yep, the brutal. I mean, that to me was the precursor to what was to come with Joel.
Oh yeah, Joel has turned the corner on caring about Ellie. As a surrogate daughter at that point.
And also has decided that by any means necessary, he will now protect her. By any means necessary. Mm-hmm. And you kind of see that flash there of like, oh shit, he just killed everyone.
Which is flashing back to when they were in the truck a few episodes earlier, and she asks like, why do you, and he's like, you do it for family. You go on for the people that, the people you love and the people that matter. That's why you do it. And so like, this is where, point of no return, she is family to him now.
So he tries to rape her. She kills him with the butcher knife. Joel shows up. They walk off. He's still in a bad way. He still can barely walk. He can walk, but he's still not in great shape.
He's running on adrenaline.
Yep. And then they leave. The crazy part about it, David in the game was kind of an ally. Like when you first meet him, you fight alongside him.
Yeah, there's an infected attack when they're waiting for
totally
his
not
man
in the
to
show
come
at
back.
all.
No.
But in the game, like I think they may have handled him a little better in the game because they set me up. You think that he's going to be an ally. And to me in the show, I always just thought he was a piece of crap. Like, as soon as you meet him, like, you're like, oh, he's going to totally, like,
I mean, to me, as long as, if you're sitting there preaching Bible shit, I'm already side-eyeing you. And, I mean, she even asks him, like, why do you believe any of that crap?
Yeah.
And of course, it does turn out later he doesn't.
Right.
He uses it as a method of control.
A wedge.
Which is exactly what religion is for.
Yeah.
So, well done, David, for using the tool properly. I mean, in the game, to me, I never trusted it. I always thought he was a bad guy.
I never got tipped off to him. I mean, eventually you do. But when I'm fighting alongside him, I
didn't know he was going to try to eat me.
Yeah.
But I never trusted him. Absolutely not.
I had more trust in him in the game, and then it gets turned on his head in the game. So I thought the flip-flop was more powerful in the game than it was in the show.
Yeah, I mean, the flip-flop is not that important to me in terms of is he a bad guy or not. The flip-flop, what's more important to me in terms of the David thing in both game and the show is how bad he is. Mm-hmm. Like, how deep that rabbit hole goes. And both the show and the game have an effective method of... In the show, you go down he's shown to be more of a molester, more of a pedophile, more of he's wants to make her his child wife. Like, it's horrifying in that regard. That part is not played up, although I guess you could say it's there implied in the game. Yeah. But I think in the game it's horrifying. The rabbit hole is more what you say, where this guy helped you in the same way you fought alongside like Joel and Bill and Henry, and then he turns out to be bad. That's the first time someone who's fought alongside you has turned out to be bad.
Right.
So that is
first real betrayal.
I think that's an effective way to do that in an interactive medium. I think that doing it the way they did in the show is a good way to adapt it.
Okay, fair enough.
Because I do, you're right that the turn on that is different, but I don't really like one more than the other.
Okay,
I might have to play the game again to know again.
To remember if there were tells.
Yeah, I might have a different opinion to that once I play the PC version. Maybe I'll see that differently. But to me, it was just like, okay, that's an adaptational change that I pretty much agree with. That's effective depending on the medium you're in.
Yep.
Also, that actor is the guy who played David is so good.
He was really good.
He was.
All the actors in this are great.
I mean, the casting is
literally
impeccable.
all of them. are great.
The girl who plays Riley is amazing.
Yeah, all of them. They're also good.
Yeah.
Episode 9, on to the season finale, where we get Ellie's true origin story. We thought we got it earlier, where they flash back to Fedra and her time in school. Here we get her as an infant, her mother, who is Ashley Johnson. Ellie's voice actor for the game, right?
Voice actor and mocap. I mean, Troy and Ashley did all the acting and everything.
Yeah.
So this is something Neil Druckmann has talked about doing with Ashley for years. They were going to do a comic, they were going to do a short film, it just never came together. And they're going to do an animation thing, and then like when they were doing this, the I can't remember the other producer, the Chernobyl guy was like, he's like, oh, do you have any kind of backstory, anything you've never had shown about Ellie? He's like, oh, I got this. He's like, that's got to go in the show. Like, so, and here we are. And again, Ashley Johnson knocks it out of the park.
Yeah, this was not in the games.
That was not, it's implied.
I think there's a note that you can read.
There's a note you can read, and Marlene does say, I knew her mother, and I promised her mother that,
I'd protect her.
I mean, that line is also in the show.
It is, yeah.
But like, this is the first time we've seen explicitly what that referred to.
Yeah.
Also, I thought the house she was in looked a lot like the farmhouse she ends up living in part 2.
A little bit. Yeah. This explains, though, how Ellie becomes immune.
Mm-hmm.
So her mother, the episode opens, her mother is running, and you can hear an infected screaming in the woods. She runs out of the woods, runs into a farmhouse.
Which is a place that they use as a safe house, it seems, because she expects...
She gets in there, she expects there to be people in there. She gets there, there's not. She barricades the door and goes upstairs and in a bedroom, and she is literally, her water breaks.
Yeah, she's in labor. And
as, she puts the door underneath the doorknob, her water breaks, and she starts having Ellie. And halfway through childbirth, the infected breaks in the door, comes in and attacks her. She manages to fight it off.
Yeah, with the switchblade that Ellie has used the whole show.
Yep. Fights it off, but then finds that she's been bitten in the leg. And I went back and rewatched, by the way, and noticed that if you watch it frame by frame, she is in fact bitten in the leg. There's a moment where the infected gets pushed down and is right on her leg and bites her fucking leg.
Yep,
that's the detail.
Yeah, they're very careful about the choreography.
Oh man, they nailed it. And so she's like, "Oh shit, I'm in the middle of having a baby." As soon as she gets bitten, realizes it. Ellie comes out and is laying there on the floor as an infant with the umbilical cord, and she cuts the umbilical cord.
And hopes that's enough.
And as it turns out, it was.
Not only was it enough, it was very important.
Yeah, because she created the first immune person.
Yeah, that seems to have been the trick.
The trick, yep. And then it jumps to the present, and this is where the show basically just follows the game. Pretty much 100%. Very little,
outside of it doesn't do the thing where, because if I remember right, when you basically go through an underwater sequence where Ellie almost drowns.
Yeah, in the game, you mean.
Yeah, in the game. And as you pull her out, that's when the Fireflies show up and knock Joel out.
Yep.
And in this, it's just they catch them.
Yep, they catch them, basically.
Which is and Marlene's like, "Oh, they didn't know who you were." I'm like, "You didn't tell them that maybe."
Hey, there's this guy and this girl.
You know what you could have done? You could have asked.
Or you could have just drawn a picture.
Yeah. Or why? There's no reason to do that to two people who are just walking through.
She knew what they looked like.
Well, I'm sure she'd given up on them.
She says, I think that she had given up, right?
But I'm just saying, in general, even if they aren't anybody important, why do you need to come up behind them and flashbang them and hit them in the face?
Yeah.
They go an extra mile in the show to show that the Fireflies suck.
Yeah.
That the Fireflies are pretty much just as bad as Fedra in a lot of ways.
And I'll say that's one part of the show that I did not get from the game.
Yeah.
I did not pick up on that from the game at all.
The Fireflies are a much more ragtag sort of... even and I think it's intended to be paralleled, and also it's intended to be building to what we find out about the Fireflies in part 2. When he's running through the hospital shooting people... They all look much more like military people than they do in the game.
They do.
In the game, they look more like just regular people with rifles or whatever.
Yeah.
But the Fireflies in the show basically have uniforms. They have body armor. They have they look like Fedra. They look like the thing they oppose. They look like the person who shot Sarah.
Yeah.
It's I think that's a more effective parallel, and especially knowing what comes later, it tracks more with what you find out about the Fireflies in the second game.
I agree.
Because the second game, I was like, oh my god, there's tons of them, and they're like an army, and there's drills and shit.
Yeah.
But now that's not going to be a surprise. There's that distinct, tangible feeling, even from the first episode, of even if the Fireflies won, you'd be trading one group of assholes for
another one. Yeah. So they're knocked unconscious. Joel wakes up in the hospital. Ellie's not there. They basically explain to him, we're going to have to kill Ellie to find the cure to stop the outbreak.
Because they need the cordyceps that is...
in its inner brain.
They actually explain it more specifically in the show, in this one, where they basically say, the trick... Something about the cordyceps in her tricks the cordyceps into thinking she's cordyceps.
Right.
And so it doesn't infect and take over. But cordyceps grows in the brain... So to do this, they have to hack her brain out.
They have to kill her. Yep.
And
they send Joel away.
They send Joel away, and they also are pretty explicit that they never woke her up and asked her about that.
No, I think they said they explained it to her.
But they don't tell her it's going to kill her.
I thought they did tell her that.
They do not, because she doesn't know.
Oh, I thought that they did tell her.
No, they tell her that we're going to do this thing and figure out what's go in and figure out what it is, but they do not tell her it will kill her.
Oh, I thought that they did.
Because if she knew that, she'd be.
I thought she was okay with it. I thought that was the whole thing.
No, because
Interesting.
the problem is that her choice is taken away from her. They never present the choice to her, the Fireflies or Joel.
Yeah.
And that's why she's so mad, is like, because that's why Joel's lie is effective about like, oh, they have tons of people that are immune and like, because she didn't know the details of what they were going to have to do to her. She assumed that she was going to die. And she says as much in the second game, like that was it has to mean something. It can't be for nothing. I mean, she says that in this show too.
Yeah.
That's why she's so quiet and depressed in this episode before they find the Fireflies. And while Joel is all chipper and up and happy he has a daughter again, yeah, he's like, "We'll go here and I'll teach you how to play the guitar." Again, music is a bonding thing, a constant theme in this series.
Yeah.
Nice little touch in the Left Behind episode. They bring in "Take on Me." They play "Take on Me" in a couple of places, which is a song that Ellie plays on the guitar in part 2. But if you go all the way back to the first couple episodes, Ellie's trying to figure out the song code that Joel uses with Tommy on the radio.
Oh, right.
80s means danger.
Oh, interesting.
They're thinking over there.
So they send Joel away. They think they're going to escort him out, and he's just going to go on his way. He kills the people who take him out.
Oh, yeah.
And then he kills everyone.
Like, very ruthless. Like, this is the closest that they ever get to actually recreating a gameplay sequence.
Yeah.
Because that is also how I play that scene.
Yeah. He's merciless.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, just no mercy. You'd see that at that point, Ellie means everything to him.
Yeah.
Then nothing else matters.
Joel isn't trying to save the world. He's just trying to save his world.
Yeah.
That's it. And that's the thing. And I've seen, the argument has started all over again about, is Joel a monster? Is he a villain? Like, Joel is not a villain.
He's just trying to survive.
But he's doing a bad thing, but he is not a villain. All the main characters in the series and as we go forward, they're all bad people to some degree. But here's the thing, Matt. But they are not villains. That's not how this show works.
Well, my thing is like, aren't the Fireflies the villains? Like, should Joel be...
They're the villains from the point of view of Joel.
I mean, I think from the point of view, again, something big difference from the game to the show. I did not look at the Fireflies that way when I played the game as I do watching. And in the show, to me, they're villains just like Fedra. Like, they're almost on equal footing with Fedra.
I mean, I don't like the Fireflies. I mean, I don't like them in the game either, frankly.
Well, then you find out they're going to kill Ellie.
Sure.
Like, to me, they become the villains. And so... they're hard to watch.
But they're only the villains from your point of view. That's
from Joel's point of view.
From the Fireflies' point of view, they have an opportunity to save the world.
They think they do.
They think they do. Yeah. And again, it should be reiterated, and this is something people keep missing when they're arguing about whether Joel did the right thing or whether Joel... It doesn't matter whether or not the vaccine they think they might be able to make would have worked or not. What matters is that Ellie was not given the choice. Right. Ellie was turned into an object. She was an object of salvation to the Fireflies, and she was an object of, frankly, salvation to Joel in a very different way. And at no point was she treated like a person in this situation. She was never given the opportunity to choose for herself.
Yeah.
And Marlene says she would choose this. We don't really know that. She probably would have, but we don't know because you didn't take the risk of asking her, did you?
Yeah.
So as horrible as what Joel may do in terms of the cost of human life and what he does to Marlene, they kind of had it coming because
I didn't feel that bad about
both sides of this situation do the same evil to Ellie.
Yeah.
They take away her agency. They do not let her choose.
Yep.
And in the end, that is the problem with what happens there. That is why I cannot be like, oh, Joel's a hero and he did exactly what I would do. I probably would do what Joel did in that situation. I do not disagree with what he did there.
Yeah.
Really, in that given that situation and the amoral world you live in, yeah, probably. But also, like, the Fireflies did the same thing he did. And nobody thought of Ellie as her own person in that situation.
Yep.
And that is the thing that Ellie is fighting against in the future, the upcoming story. And the idea that her life has to mean something, and she has come to believe that her life only has meaning if she basically is special in the way of her immunity. Mm-hmm. She is struggling at the beginning of Last of Us Part 2 to feel special as a person just because of who she is.
Right.
And one of the reasons for that is she feels that choice was taken away from her. And that is the key to that dilemma. And that is why you can't just say one or the other is the good guy or the villain, because everyone's an asshole here.
Yeah. There are no good guys.
No.
You can't be a good guy and survive in that
And
world.
that is one of the big lessons of part 2.
It is. Yeah.
You know, like you have to leave your assumptions at the door in this series in a lot of ways.
Yep.
Because there is no black and white, there is no good or evil, there is only us. There's only, you know, it's titled that for a reason.
Yeah. So Marlene finds them in the garage, about to escape. She gives him one last chance, and he kills her. He kills Marlene.
You'd only come after her.
Yep. And he's right.
Yeah.
And so they get in the car, and then the final scene for season 1.
Oh, also the one of the nurses in the surgery room is Laura Bailey, who plays Abby in the game.
Oh, wow.
So,
that's awesome. I didn't notice that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, it's hard to notice with them. I didn't notice
Right.
either, but they posted about it on the Twitter.
And he also doesn't kill them.
He kills the doctor.
But he doesn't kill the nurses.
Doesn't kill the nurses.
Yeah. He left them alive.
Yeah, you don't have to kill everybody.
He pretty much killed everybody else, though.
Well, you made them face them up. But, I mean, the doctor, to be fair, pulled a scalpel on him.
He did, yeah.
Which was
is so
really
funny.
dumb.
But it showed his conviction as well.
Oh, yeah, I mean, the doctor
Like,
believes...
I know this scalpel's a joke, but this is humanity.
He believes this is humanity's last hope.
Yeah. And then, so the final scene then, she finally wakes up, they're driving, and she asks him, you know, he tells her some lame story about how, they had found all kinds of other people like you, and it didn't work. And so they didn't end up needing you after all.
And then raiders attacked, and I barely got you out of there. And
Yep. And then she says, are you telling me the truth? And he says, yes. And she's like, I believe you. And
she's like, okay.
Oh, and she does not
That's
believe
the end
him.
of the show. She doesn't quite believe him, no.
She does not believe
But at the same time, what else is she going to do?
Yeah. And that brings us to the end of season 1. Just an amazing show, Matt. Like, I have watched every zombie show ever. As I've said on Game Face many times, I am one of the few people who made it to the end of The Walking Dead. I watched it all the way to the end. I have watched every zombie film ever made. And Matt, like, I would argue this may be the best zombie-based media ever made.
I would agree with that, although I have a much lower opinion of zombie media in general.
I mean, I don't have a high opinion of it either.
No.
Like, I'm not a fool. I realize that it's not... It's not high art, generally.
Walking Dead lost me in season 2, so...
Yeah. Most people made it to 3.
For me, it was the episode where they spend the whole episode trying to get the zombie out of the well.
Oh, yeah.
And they keep... It's like, don't hurt the zombie or it'll contaminate the well. It's a corpse in a well. It's already contaminated.
Yeah.
Like, because it breaks in half or something.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, now we can't drink the water. I'm like, you shouldn't be drinking that water anyway.
Yeah, I hear you.
But, like... it just got too stupid for me, and it took too long to do
I hear
anything.
you. But so my point is that I've consumed zombie everything, and this just destroys all of it.
Right. Although I would also argue that, like, this show isn't really about zombies.
It's not.
Like,
It's about human beings.
There are no infected in the last,
two episodes. There are none.
No.
Not a single zombie.
And quite frankly, so what is it? I'm trying to think. 7. Are there any, outside of the flashback in Left Behind, in terms of present day events, are there any zombies in that show after...
Once it gets to David, I don't think there's another zombie.
I was going to say, are there any zombies in that show after they escape from Kathleen and Sam gets killed?
No, I don't think
there are.
Yeah. It just shows you, though. You don't need them.
You don't need them. Yeah. There are I mean, it's basically a pandemic show. It's an apocalypse.
It's an end of the world apocalypse show.
It doesn't necessarily matter what it is.
It could have been anything. Yeah.
You just but doing what you did it's super creepy. It's got a basis in reality. So you have all these people that didn't know that zombie ants exist get to learn that horrifying fact, and then you get the makeup and all. I mean, they're memorable, nothing, no other creature in horror really looks like the clickers.
No.
And mushrooms are gross. Like, let's
they
be
are
honest,
gross because they grow in wet, damp areas. They're just gross.
And just the recognizability of
they look gross.
I
hate eating. Like, I don't eat mushrooms on anything.
I do to some degree. I thought I didn't like mushrooms until I love Japanese curry. And after years of eating Japanese curry and loving it, at some point I was like, I just don't know what it is about it. Like, I like it so much. And someone who knows how to make Japanese curry was like, oh, it's the shiitake mushrooms. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And yes, that's the main flavor. That's the umami flavor in Japanese curry. And so I tried just a shiitake mushrooms separately. And yes, that is absolutely the flavor I love in Japanese curry. I'm like, I could have been eating this my whole fucking life.
You realize we just started talking about eating mushrooms?
Yeah.
That's where we've gone?
Of course. I mean, I don't want to eat a clicker, but like that's the other thing is I think we've become kind of inured to the decaying corpse zombie.
Yeah.
And so this thing this is a different kind of body horror. Is that feeling of being taken over by something. Also, and this is a little science fact for you. They did MRI scans and CAT scans on infected ants had been infected and died from cordyceps. There is no cordyceps in the ant's brain. So when Sam asks, "Do you think you're still you in there when you become a monster?" Probably.
You are. Yeah.
The brain. I mean, who knows what it says it grows in the brain. That's what Marlene and Joel talk about. So maybe not. But in ants, the cordyceps grows into the muscular system. It does not grow into the brain. So the ant is, as much as an ant can be, literally watching itself disobey itself.
Oh, it's so twisted.
Yeah, I find that a lot creepier than just sort of a random. Yeah. The corpse reanimates thing.
Yeah. This show's great. Can you think of I really have to nitpick to find any real criticisms of it. Have you managed to really find any?
No.
It's kind of peerless.
My only, just like that's not what a 2003 arcade would look like, but that is a nitpick of all nitpicks. It doesn't matter at all. Like that makes Cinema Sins look like deep criticism. So I don't have no notes. Frankly.
When do you think we'll get season 2?
2 years.
Yeah, me too. It's going to be a while.
Yeah.
They have said already that they're going to get at least 2 seasons out of The Last of Us Part 2. Mm-hmm. So we have at least 2 more seasons coming, and then hopefully in that time, the third game will be released.
I'll tell you what I do think is I think they are going to shoot seasons 2 and 3 simultaneously. Like
it makes sense.
Back to back.
Yeah.
Both because they are all connected, and so you kind of want to get all that together. Also because you don't want some of these actors to age.
Ellie particularly. Because you get to your mid-20s, that's when you can turn into an adult versus an adolescent.
And same with all her friends. Dina and all those guys are all gonna, and Abby, they're all gonna need to be a certain age for the whole time. And I think they're gonna shoot that all at once.
Yeah.
And then spread it out. So my guess is 2 years for season 2. Season 3 will still be in production during that time, and then they can release season 3. They could release it a year after season 2.
Right.
They could wait a little. Basically, you release that when you know you are going to be released this season. You'll be able to release season 3, and then Last of Us Part 3 will come out in the following year. Yeah. And then by a year after that, you'll be ready to start working on season 4 out.
Yeah. Yep. It makes sense.
Now, I think they will start working on season 4 simultaneously with the game. I don't think there'll be as much lag time between the game and season 4 as we might think. But obviously, they've flat out said the game will come out first.
Yeah, an amazing show, just across the board. So the acting, the production value, they nailed everything. Like the giraffe scene where you get to look over the ruins, like the way everything's overgrown. They just nailed. And
that was my favorite bit of discourse was the people talking about how the CG giraffe looked really fake. That was a real giraffe.
Yeah, I thought it was a real giraffe.
It is a real giraffe.
Yeah.
In fact, it's one of the only real things in the shot. Right. But just amazing. I mean, you're just so ready to talk about how you hate CG, you don't know what you're looking at anymore.
Yeah, because it's that good.
And part of it, this was very funny because part of it was like, well, it's a fake giraffe because all the spots on it are wrong. And it's like, no, it's just a different species of giraffe than the one they did in the game because every species of giraffe has different markings.
Yeah. Yep. So anyway,
Google things before you yell about it, people. Come on.
Yep. Just an amazing show. It really sucked. It was only 9 episodes. It ended way too soon.
And yet, it covered everything exactly as it needed to.
And I thought they did a great job of really hitting all the important parts of the first game. Mm-hmm. I felt like all the changes they made were smart, and there was good reason behind them. It's just really hard for me to find.
And I think there's still reason to play the game.
Yeah,
there's still reason to watch the show and play the game. They are both companion pieces in a really good way.
Yeah,
they do not make one another redundant, which is super rare. It is absolutely the best adaptation of a video game ever.
Not even close. It's in its own league. I hope that others will eventually join that league.
I hope so.
But my hopes are not high.
Part of it is the source material. You are dealing with a very linear narrative story from a game that doesn't lose a lot if you take out the kind of the gameplay elements much. You're not missing a lot, as opposed to say if you tried to do Shadow of the Colossus, you can't really cut any of that out because part of the reason that story works is because of the journey. Whereas like if you cut out all the clicker stealth sequences, you don't really lose anything from The Last of Us.
Yeah.
And I know I've seen people that's like, oh well, like I hope that like the future Sony stuff they're working on is gonna like take lessons from this and be as good. I'm like, I don't know, man. Like I don't know how you take Gran Turismo and do this.
It's kind of the perfect storm. Or God of War, really, or Horizon.
I think you could do a God of War series about like in a similar vein if you do 2018, not the original stuff. But again, God of War
still not as good.
God of War does. I mean, God of War, you're it's not on the level of Last of Us in general. And it's going to be fantastical and weird in a way that Last of Us isn't, and Last of Us is very grounded and human. It's just a unique property.
It really is.
It's also like
but also still kind of being derivative, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, it's not, none of it is a new idea. It's just really executed well. Again, really we're going back to my innovation versus execution thing. It really matters. If you can, if you execute well enough to make me forget that I've seen a million zombie movies and just watch this on its own terms, that's a triumph in and of itself. Also, we can see how things could go wrong in a narrative-driven linear story by watching the Uncharted movie, which I do not recommend anyone do.
I don't either. And with that, we'll call it. Thank you for listening to this episode of Spoiled. If you like our content, you like what we're doing, head to patreon.com/sifted. You can pledge as much or as little per month as you want. We appreciate every single dollar and every single patron. So, Matt, great talking to you about this great show. We hope that you guys enjoyed the show as much as we do, and we can't wait until season 2.